Almost every culture on Earth tells stories about dragons. Giant reptiles that stalk the land, armored, unstoppable, terrifying anything that crosses their path. We meet them in fairy tales, on castle walls, in films, and in games, long before we ever open a science book. And for most of human history, that is all a dragon ever was: a story. But here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. What if one of those monsters was not invented at all? What if a real dragon were still out there right now, walking a handful of remote islands, carrying a biology shaped over millions of years? It exists. And by the end of this, you will understand why the truth about it is far stranger than any legend. A deadly weapon scientists got wrong for decades. A hunting method built for blood loss and shock. And a secret about how these animals reproduce that sounds impossible. Until you see the proof. Before we get into it, tap like and subscribe. It helps more people find Creature Expo, and it lets us keep making these. Done? Wonderful. Let's go meet a dragon. Our story starts barely a century ago, which is astonishingly recent for an animal this large. For generations, the people of these Indonesian islands knew the creature perfectly well. Local names include Ora, and stories of a giant land crocodile were already part of life there. But the wider scientific world had no idea it existed. Then, around 1910, reports reached a Dutch colonial officer named Lieutenant van Stein van Hensbroek. The stories sounded almost unbelievable. An enormous reptile living on an island called Komodo. So he went looking. And he came back with proof. The skin of a very real, very large lizard. He sent that skin and a photograph to Peter Owens, director of the Zoological Museum in what is now Bogor on Java. Owens recognized that this was something new to science. In 1912, he published the first formal description and gave the animal the name it still carries today: Varanus komodoensis. Just like that, the world learned that a creature that felt like it belonged in legend was alive and walking through the dry forests of Indonesia. So let's take a proper look at what van Stein van Hensbroek actually found. The Komodo dragon is the largest living lizard on Earth. Not a dinosaur, despite the nickname. It is a monitor lizard, part of the same wider family as other monitors found across Asia, Africa, and Australia. An adult can reach about 3 meters long, or roughly 10 feet, from nose to tail. Most wild adults are much lighter than people imagine, often around 70 kilograms, or 154 pounds. But the biggest verified individuals have been recorded far heavier, partly because these animals can carry a huge amount of food in their stomachs after a meal. Picture a predatory lizard as long as a small car, with a heavy body, a muscular tail, armored-looking skin, and a head built for tearing meat. That is the Komodo dragon. Now here is the first thing that should surprise you. For an animal with such a fearsome reputation, its world is tiny. Komodo dragons live only on a few islands in eastern Indonesia, including Komodo, Rinca, Flores, Gili Motang, and nearby smaller islands. That's it. The largest living lizard on Earth survives in one of the smallest ranges of any famous predator. Hold on to that fact, because it matters a great deal later. Let's find out how it hunts, because this is where the dragon earns its name. Watch the tongue. That long, forked tongue is not just flicking at random. It is sampling the air, collecting scent particles, and carrying them to a special sensory organ on the roof of the mouth. In effect, the dragon smells in stereo. It compares scent information from the left and right tips of its tongue, then uses that difference to work out which direction the smell is coming from. And it is frighteningly good at this. In the right conditions, a Komodo dragon can detect carrion, a dead or dying animal, from several kilometers away. It is mostly an ambush hunter. It waits near game trails, still and patient, until an animal comes close enough. Then it strikes with sudden speed. For something so bulky, it can move shockingly fast in short bursts, up to about 20 kilometers per hour, or around 12 miles per hour. Its prey can be deer, wild pigs, goats, monkeys, water buffalo, carrion, and sometimes smaller Komodo dragons. Yes, Komodo dragons will eat other Komodo dragons. And that grim detail tells you something important about this animal. It is not just powerful. It is opportunistic. Anything that can become food can become food. But now we arrive at the part of the story that fooled people for decades. Because the obvious question is simple. How does a lizard bring down something as large as a water buffalo? For a long time, the answer seemed obvious. And it was wrong. Here is the version you have probably heard. The Komodo dragon, the story went, has a mouth so filthy, so packed with deadly bacteria from rotting meat, that one bite infects the victim with blood poisoning. The dragon bites once, then simply follows the doomed animal for days, waiting for infection to finish the job. It is a wonderfully creepy idea. It appeared in books, documentaries, and zoo signs for years. But the problem is, it is not the full story, and the most famous version of it is not really true. In 2009, a team led by biologist Brian Fry scanned the head of a Komodo dragon and found something the old bacteria story had missed: venom glands in the lower jaw. When researchers analyzed the venom, they found toxins linked to anticoagulation, low blood pressure, and shock. So the dragon was not relying on a dirty mouth as its secret weapon. It was delivering venom. Real venom. The real killing method is more precise and, honestly, more disturbing. The Komodo dragon does not need a crushing bite like a crocodile. Its teeth are not built like blunt clamps. They are curved, sharp, serrated, and replaceable, almost like a row of steak knives. The dragon bites down, pulls back with its powerful neck, and opens deep wounds. Then the venom helps keep the blood flowing and the victim weakening. Grip, slice, poison. That is the real weapon. Not a magic infection days later, not a monster with a rotting mouth. A living predator with cutting teeth, a violent feeding style, and venom that helps turn blood loss into shock. For decades, the scarier-sounding story got repeated, but the truth hiding underneath was even stranger. Now, you were promised a secret, and here it is. A female Komodo dragon can produce offspring without a male. No mating, no father. Just one female, laying eggs that can hatch into living young. This process is called parthenogenesis, and one of the most famous cases happened in 2006 at Chester Zoo in England, with a female named Flora. Flora had never been with a male Komodo dragon, and yet she laid viable eggs. Around the same time, another female at London Zoo also produced offspring without fertilization. Genetic testing confirmed what had happened. These were fatherless Komodo dragons. And it gets even stranger. Because of the way sex is determined in these reptiles, the fatherless offspring are male. That means, in theory, a lone female arriving on an empty island could lay eggs by herself, produce sons, and later create the beginning of a new population. One animal, one island, one impossible-sounding biological backup plan. The trade-off is serious. Offspring produced this way have less genetic variety, which can make a population more fragile over time. But as an emergency strategy for a species living on scattered islands, it is extraordinary. The Komodo dragon is not just a predator, it is a survivor. That brings us to another mystery. How did a lizard get this big in the first place? For a long time, the easy answer was island gigantism. The idea was simple. Isolate a lizard on remote islands, remove some competition, give it large prey, and over time, it becomes a giant. It is a tidy story, but the fossil evidence points to something more complicated. Komodo dragons may not have become huge because they ended up on islands. They may already have been huge. Fossils suggest that giant monitor lizards once ranged across Australia and the surrounding region. Australia was also home to Megalania, also known as Varanus priscus, an extinct giant monitor far larger than today's Komodo dragon. So the Komodo dragon may be the last survivor of a much older world, a relic of a vanished dynasty of giant lizards. Not an island oddity. A survivor. And there is a fascinating wrinkle in its diet, too. Many of the large animals Komodo dragons eat today, like deer and pigs, were introduced by humans thousands of years ago. Before that, these islands had dwarf elephants, relatives of modern elephants called stegodon. So picture that lost world for a second. Tropical islands, dry forests, small elephants, and giant lizards moving through the landscape. If that does not sound like something out of a fantasy story, nothing does. But this is not fantasy. This is natural history. And this is where the story flips. For all its menace, the most vulnerable creature in this tale may be the dragon itself. In 2021, the Komodo dragon's official status was raised to endangered on the IUCN Red List. Its problem is the same thing we flagged earlier. It lives almost nowhere. Confined to a handful of islands, it has limited room to move if conditions change. Rising seas threaten low-lying habitat. A warming climate can reshape the dry savanna and forest landscapes it depends on. Human pressure, tourism development, agriculture, and habitat loss add even more strain. The monster of legend, it turns out, is far more vulnerable than the people who fear it. And maybe that is the real lesson of the last living dragon. We grew up imagining dragons as invincible villains. But the real animal is something richer. A venomous hunter, science badly misunderstood. A mother that can produce sons without a mate. The final survivor of an ancient line of giants. And a creature whose future now depends almost entirely on us. The dragons of our stories never needed protecting. This one does. That is the Komodo dragon, the world's largest living lizard, the last living dragon. And somehow, even stranger than the legend. If you enjoyed meeting it, like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which creature we should track down next. There are plenty more legends out there waiting to be explained.